Okay, good evening. Welcome, dear students, to the 15th session. Today we'll continue the gastrointestinal system. We'll go down from the esophagus to the stomach, which is a very important dynamic organ with lots and lots of functions, not just the digestion, but also many things. Okay, usually when we are talking about, when we start the gastrointestinal system, especially the stomach, we start with acid peptic disease or peptic ulcer diseases. That is the heading for today, peptic ulcer diseases. Can anyone type the answer? Definition of ulcer. You're all right. Ulcer is an ulcer. But what exactly is the definition? Definition is any disruption of mucosal integrity. Any disruption of the mucosal integrity of the stomach or duodenum leading to a local defect or excavation due to inflammation. Any disruption of the mucosal integrity of the stomach or duodenum leading to a local defect or excavation due to inflammation. These ulcers can occur in the stomach or in the duodenum, right? Usually the ulcers are very chronic. Usually they are chronic, but acute ulcers also are known, but they're less common. We'll come to the acute ulcers. And this peptic ulcer disease is very common, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries like USA. The acid peptic diseases or peptic ulcer diseases are very common, very common. And 30% of the patients come to the hospitals or private clinics with the GIT related complaints. GIT related complaints. So in USA alone, there are 4 million acid peptic diseases per year, 4 million. And males are more common. The disease is more common in males compared to the females. And 12% of men, they are prone for the acid peptic any time in their life. And when it comes to women, it is 10%. Okay, and it is causing about 1,500 deaths in US, the acid peptic related deaths are 1,500 per year in the US. So when we talk about the ulcer peptic acid peptic disease or peptic ulcer diseases, we have to talk about the two things. That is, one is acid production. The acid is very important for the digestion. It melts the fats, proteins and carbohydrates. Acid is very important for the digestion and mixture of the food that we take into the stomach. But this acid can cause damage to the mucosal layer of the stomach. Acid, which is useful and important for the digestion, it is also at the same time it damages the mucous membrane of the stomach. So therefore, we have a balancing mechanism here. God has given alkalis also. Stomach also produces alkalis, bicarbs. So these alkalis, when they produce, they try to neutralize the acids and prevent they protect the mucosa, prevent the damage that is being caused by the acids. So both are produced in the stomach only. We'll come to that. And these problems, the acid peptic related problems are little insidious onset, and they also affect the lifestyle of a patient. They have to take leaves from absence from the job, and the dietary habits will be disturbed, the sleep will be disturbed. So it affects the lifestyle of individuals. So sometimes we may have to apply leave because of the pain or vomiting. So it affects the general lifestyle of the people who are suffering. see the stomach, as I said, it produces a lot of noxious agents, a lot of irritants, dangers like your acid, hydrochloric acid, pepsin, the bile salts, bile acids, the pancreatic enzyme. These are the noxious agents that are produced in the stomach. They can damage your mucous membrane. At the same time, sometimes drugs that we take also can cause damage to this epithelium. This can cause damage to the epithelium. So, as I said, acid, pepsin, bile acid, pancreatic enzymes as a drug. Similarly, we have some infections, some bacteria which enter into the gut. The bacteria which enters into the stomach also can cause damage and inflammation of the mucosa. So this, if you come to the histology of the stomach, we have the fold. Stomach has folds, rugae, what we call is rugae. In the rugae, we have the microscopic pits, the small pits, where they have there's a lot of specialized. I'll just show a picture. A lot of specialized cells are present in the micro pits in the rugae of the stomach, which a lot of different types of cells producing mucus, producing hormone, producing acid, producing endocrines. A lot of different cells are present, and they're in resting phase when there is no food, or when before the food, all these cells are in resting phase. When the food enters into the stomach, all these cells gets activated and start producing acid, mucus, endocrine. There's a small thin mucus layer. The small thin mucus layer covers the entire stomach, and the submucous layer, the epithelium cells have different types of cells which produce all these substances that we are discussing. So, and there is also a defense mechanism, defense protection from the acids and the unwanted noxious agents that stomach itself secretes. There is a three-layer protection that we have. One is the pre-epithelial layer. Pre-epithelial layer, that is the very thin mucus stomach, and second is the epithelial, pre-epithelial layer, epithelial layer, and subepithelial. There are three epithelial layer that is they keep protecting the mucosa. So first one is the mucous layer, which contains bicarbonate phospholipid layer, which acts not only like as a physiological barrier, but also one second. Sorry. Off cover. Switch off. So second is the surface epithelial layer and the subepithelial. Subepithelial layer, we have microvascular system where the bicarbonates that is present in the blood come into the lumen and try to protect the epithelium from these noxious chemicals. It provides a bicarbonate which neutralizes the acid. So the three defense layers are present in the. I'll show you a picture here. Yes, I'll just speak. No, this one. You can see here. Yeah, you can see here. This is a micro pit, that is the millions of pits are present in the rugae, the folds of the stomach. This is the micro pit. The whole thing is a small pit. You can see different cells here. This is the mucosal cells, and this is the parietal cell, this is endocrine cell, and these are the various cells that produce different chemicals. And I'll show you the next pic. Yeah. So this is exactly the three-layer defense that we have. The mucous layer and the epithelial layer and the microvasculature, this is the blood supply. So this is a protective layer, the superficial mucous protective layer that has a lot of bicarbonates, and this is a cell layer which produces the bicarbonates, and the blood supply, that even blood brings the bicarbonates and supplies to the epithelium for the protection. These are the three layers of protection that we have against the acid and pepsin and all that. So the gastric secretion, hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen, it follows a circadian rhythm. The acid secretion also produces circadian. It is very high, the highest in the midnight. From around 12 o'clock in the night to 3 a.m., the acid production is maximum, and early morning it is minimum. That is the circadian rhythm that the gastric acid production, physiological acid production, it is highest. The basal production, food related production, just like insulin production. Insulin, there is a basal production of the pancreas, and the bolus, the food related products, spikes, excursions. Same thing here, and there's a basal production of acid, which is more in the night and less in the morning. And again, one more wave of acid secretion, that is food related. Whenever we eat, the acid secretions is, so two different types of production. One is basal, one is the food related spikes. That follows a typical circadian pattern. And this acid also helps in the protein. This acid helps in the protein fast digestion, and also it helps. The acid is important for the absorption of a lot of things like iron, calcium, magnesium, even B12. That's why whenever we are giving these tablets, like we have to give on empty stomach, like calcium, magnesium, iron, B12. So because for their absorption, acid is essential. So the antagonist of acid is the prostaglandin. Prostaglandins they play a very, very important role in defense mechanism. They protect the acid from damaging the epithelium. And it takes a very important role in maintaining the integrity and repair. Even there is a slightest damage because of the acid, naturally it gets repaired. Only when these mechanisms fail do we get the ulcers and all. So even the protection repair is a continuous damage, protection, repair, damage, protection, repair. This is a continuous process that goes on that keeps the homeostasis of the gastric mucosa. And even this acid also kills the ingested bacteria. When we are eating, a lot of bacteria go into the stomach, and this acid helps to kill the maximum number of bacteria, only which escape the attack of acid do go inside down and cause diarrhea and other infections in the intestine. But acid is very important not only for digestion but also for absorption of these nutrients, and also it kills the bacteria. So in coming to the ulcer peptic disease, this is the anatomy and physiology that we are talking about. The pathophysiology of the ulcer peptic disease, the ulcer, usually whenever there is a small damage, inflammation or small damage, we don't call them as ulcer. To qualify to call as an ulcer, the size of the defect should be at least more than 5 millimeters. More than 5 millimeters, and it should be, the depth should be up to the submucosa. It is only then that you have got a right to call it as an ulcer. Any superficial, just discontinuity, this redness, you cannot call it as ulcer. So ulcer means it should be more than 5 mm and the depth should be to the submucous area. So the pathogenesis, the pathology, the signs and symptoms, the mechanism and the treatment is same for duodenal and gastric ulcers. Both are different, duodenal ulcer and gastric ulcer. The pathogenesis, the causes and the complaint, the symptomatology and the treatment, everything is same for duodenal and the gastric ulcer. But there are a lot of difference otherwise. What are the risk factors of this acid peptic disease? Who are more prone for these acid peptic disease, be it duodenal or gastric? Duodenal ulcers are more common in young people. Gastric ulcers are more common in elderly, people who are 50 and 60. So who are the risk factors? Who are the people who may get these acid peptic diseases, ulcer peptic diseases? H. pylori infection. H. pylori previously, actually, gastric ulcer or duodenal ulcer were part of the textbook of surgery about 30 or 40 years back. Ulcers were always treated with surgeries. When we were students in Osmania Medical College, at any given time, now the incidence also has come down. When we were students, at any given point of time in general ward, we used to have at least 10 patients with ulcers, and most of them requiring surgical treatment like gastrojejunostomy, Billroth 1, Billroth 2, or pyloroplasty. So at any given time in the surgery list, we used to have at least 3 to 4 gastrojejunostomies. But since last 30 or 40 years, now because of the identification of the infection, infection is one of the causes of the ulcer diseases, that is H. pylori. Now, the topic of acid peptic disease has come to medicine now. If you see in medicine textbook, this acid peptic disease appearing. Previously, it was a surgery topic, actually, because of the treatment. Now, hardly we do surgery for acid peptic disease. Even for ulcers, usually don't, unless there is a gastric outlet obstruction, the pyloric stenosis, all these complications. If there is a rupture, if there is a bleeding, if there is a perforation, it is only then that we go for surgical treatment. But otherwise, now most of the acid peptic diseases are being treated with just medical management. So who are the people? I told you, like young people, duodenal ulcer is very common. Old people, gastric ulcer is more common. So H. pylori is one of the very, very common, if you check the H. pylori, if they do a stomach biopsy in 100 people, in Asians especially, 90%, 90% will have H. pylori infection. But then how many people will really become symptomatic? How many people treat? That's a different question. Even after treating, sometimes it may recur. It runs in families. It's an infection. Surprisingly, before 2 or 3 decades, the acid peptic disease was not even considered that it could happen because of infection. Now it is proven beyond any doubt that this H. pylori is a bacteria. It's a gram-negative bacteria. It takes like a S-shaped gram-negative bacteria. We used to call it as a Helicobacter or Campylobacter jejuni. We used to call it as Campylobacter jejuni. Now the name has changed to H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. That's a gram-negative. So who are the risk? Who are the people who may get this H. pylori related acid peptic disease? One is patients, as I told you, elderly patient, COPD, chronic kidney disease patient, tobacco in any form, be it smoking, be it chewing, be it whatever it is. Tobacco is one of the major risk factors of production of because it damages the mucosal barrier that the stomach has. And old age, of course. Surprisingly, coronary artery disease, ischemic heart disease also is one of the risk factors for the production of acid peptic disease. And alcohol, of course, yes, Yes, I know. Former alcoholics, people who take binge drinkers, who take heavy alcoholics, they are also prone for these acid peptic related disease. Obesity is another risk factor, probably because of the pressure, exact mechanism. Diabetes is one of the risk factors for the acid peptic diseases. So coming to duodenal, we'll separate out duodenal ulcer from the gastric ulcer. Can you show the picture, Arbaz? As I told you, duodenal ulcer occurs more in young people, type A personalities, and gastric ulcers occur in elderly people who are 50 and 60 plus. The endoscopic view of these two, yeah. So the first one is the duodenal ulcer with the arrow. This is the duodenal ulcer. And these are the gastric ulcers. So it's very difficult for you to appreciate this in endoscopic picture, but you should understand that the ulcers can occur in the duodenum as well as the stomach. Okay. So coming to duodenal ulcers, as I told you, it occurs early in life, and 95% of the ulcers occur in first part of the duodenum. 90%. If somebody has a duodenal ulcer in the remaining portion of the second, third, fourth part of the duodenum, it could be, you have to be very careful. It could be something different underlying, some malignancy or some problem. So most of the duodenal ulcers occur in first part of the duodenum. And gastric ulcers, as I said, it occurs late in life, and males are more prone. They are more common than females. And gastric ulcers, usually they may be silent. So how to differentiate? We used to, our teachers used to tell, if it is a duodenal ulcer, the pain starts before the food and after 3 to 4 hours of the eating. Whereas the gastric ulcer pain starts with the food immediately. So the food, if the pain subsides with the food, that is a duodenal ulcer. If the pain increases the food, that is the gastric ulcer. That was the teaching. So it holds good for many patients even now. Yeah, that is one reason is H. pylori. H. pylori also can cause, it's a majority of the patients are having H. pylori, and H. pylori also is very dangerous. It can also cause not just the ulcer, but it can also cause malignancies, lymphomas. So H. pylori is just a bacteria. It can cause ulcers most of the time, but it also can cause cancers in some people. And we have another very important cause is as drugs. Usually NSAIDs. These are the painkillers, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which is very commonly used across the counter drug. We don't have to show the prescriptions. You can just buy ibuprofen or aceclofenac or diclofenac. These are the aspirin you can buy across the counter. These are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which are notorious, very common. Thousands of people come with drug-induced acid peptic disease. And these are the most commonly used drug, painkillers, and especially after the COX-2 inhibitors came into being, which is again 20 or 25 years back, the safety margin has increased, but these drugs are still causing acid peptic disease and ulcers in many patients. So these drugs not just cause gastritis, they can cause ulcers, they can cause bleeding, they can cause perforation also. So I remember one of our teachers, when I was a student, one of our teachers was a gastroenterologist, Dr. Prasad, the gastroenterologist. He took one tablet of Brufen and he had a massive hematemesis, and he was to be admitted in the hospital. We had to give some 6 to 8 bottles of blood, one tablet. Even aspirin also. We use aspirin like water. So many people. Suppose you're in a cardiology department, cardiology hospital, every patient of ischemic heart disease, coronary artery disease, are given these antiplatelet drugs in the form of either aspirin or clopidogrel. Aspirin is again is a gastric irritant. It causes in many people, and unfortunately there is no dose. It's not a dose related complication. Even as I told you, even one tablet aspirin, even if it is 75 milligrams, one tablet aspirin can cause the perforation in some unfortunate people. So you have to be very careful. That's why whenever you are giving these painkillers, we should be extremely careful. And we give, sometimes if it is inevitable, we give proton pump inhibitor along with that concomitantly to prevent these drug-induced gastric irritation and ulcer formation. So after the H. pylori, NSAID is very important cause of this peptic ulcer diseases. Because there's no safe dose here. If you're allergic, if you're prone, you may get the problem even with one tablet, as I said. Smoking is another very important risk factor, major risk factor. This is one of the, it is included in one of the pathogenesis causing peptic ulcer diseases. It also causes not just causes the ulcers, but also reduces the healing time. The natural healing time also is reduced because of the smoking, and the drug responsiveness also becomes less in people who smoke. They need to be given long-term treatment if they come with these acid peptic related diseases. And smokers are more prone for perforation. There's ulcers are more prone for perforation, smokers. So again, there are certain dietary, the food substances which can cause your acid peptic diseases, but what exactly the mechanism is still not known. There are certain foods and beverages. If you are allergic to that particular thing, usually they say spicy, but again, this is controversial. The spicy food may cause symptoms, but may not really cause the ulceration. There are a lot of studies were done, but yes, food is one of the reasons in some people, food and certain beverages. So what are the signs and symptoms of these ulcer related diseases? What are the signs? As you know, it is only pain, upper abdomen pain. Or they can come with, first time they can come with bleeding. Especially if it is a gastric ulcer, many times gastric ulcer patients will not have any symptoms. They may, first presentation could be just the perforation or massive hematemesis. They can come first time with that. They may not have symptoms for a long time. And they also can come with obstructive symptoms. If there is a duodenal ulcer, if it is a chronic duodenal ulcer, while healing, it causes the narrowing of the, Arvaz, can you show here? Especially the pylorus, the pyloric end of the stomach gets narrowed and you get what is called as a pyloric stenosis. If patients come with obstruction, stenosis, recurrent vomiting, gastric dilatation, you do an endoscopy, you find the pyloric stenosis, obstruction of the gastric outlet. It's called gastric outlet obstruction syndrome. So in these patients, usually they don't respond to the oral medication. You have to submit the patient for surgical repair. So as I said, the pain is not very typical. It can mimic any pain. Usually it is a dull aching, and sometimes they may have burning sensation. Usually in the epigastrium, mid upper abdomen, or sometimes if it is a duodenal, if it is occurring posteriorly. Posterior ulcers, patient may come with interscapular pain or even right hypochondriac pain, mimicking cholecystitis and other pancreatitis and other things. So the hallmark is definitely pain, but the location is variable. It's an ill-defined, aching, dull, boring pain, and some they can come with heartburns, burning in mid-chest pain, acid reflux pain, and that. And this pain looks just like hunger pain. That's why when you eat food after this pain, you feel kind of relief. Okay. Typically, the duodenal ulcer patients will have pain after 1.5 to 3 hours of food intake. Typically, after 1.5 to 3 hours of the pain. Unlike the gastric. So it's a gastric ulcer, the moment you take food, the pain increases. And this pain, the duodenal ulcer pain, decreases with food and decreases with antacids. And somebody has a severe pain in the middle of the night, so you're waking up with the pain around 12 o'clock midnight to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. That is again a typical duodenal ulcer pain. And 2/3 of the patients will have some kind of nocturnal pain if they are suffering from duodenal ulcer. Coming to gastric ulcer, it is the pain is precipitated by food. The moment you take food, you get pain within 15 to 20 minutes. That is one of the important timing of the meal timing. What is the mechanism? Till now, so many investigations we have done, so many research have gone into, but what is the exact mechanism of the pain of the duodenal ulcer or gastric ulcer is not very clearly understood. So on exam is signs. What is the clinical picture? Signs and symptoms. Signs and symptoms, clinical, we have epigastric tenderness, but generally all our junior doctors, residents and PGs, we have a bad habit of writing acute gastritis for any tenderness, epigastric tenderness or patient coming with vomiting. So mind you, you are allowed to write gastritis only when there is a histological evidence of inflammation. So gastritis is not a, it is a loosely used term. Every day we see our doctors writing acute gastritis. Any upper abdominal pain with vomiting, acute gastritis. So gastritis should be used, the word should be limitedly used only to the histologically, histopathologically proven like gastric inflammation. Otherwise, until then, you have to call it as a dyspepsia. This is dyspepsia. Not every patient coming with upper abdominal pain and vomiting is acute gastritis. We loosely use this term. Many doctors. So be careful when you are writing that. Dyspepsia, the right diagnosis. You investigate. If you do endoscopy and then see if there is inflammation, if there is a biopsy-proven inflammation, then yes, it is gastritis. Gastritis is not as common as we think. Again, if the patient is in a bad shape, suppose patient has bled or perforated, they can come with the tachycardia, dyspnea, and hypotension. Hypotension if there is bleeding or hematemesis, massive blood vomiting. If the patient has perforation, he can come, but the patient can come with acute abdomen-like picture, board-like rigidity, and which you have to immediately submit the patient for proper investigation. And if you take an X-ray chest, you can see the gas escaping from the perforation under the liver. So you can nicely see even simple plain X-ray, erect abdomen. Patient should be made to stand if possible. The standing erect abdomen X-ray, you see some gas escaping into the under the liver. That's the most common evidence of a perforation of the hollow viscus. It could be gastric or duodenal ulcers. So these kind of patients have to be submitted for emergency surgical repair, laparotomy. And sometimes when there is an obstruction, as I told you, when there is an obstruction to the pyloric end, gastric outlet obstruction syndrome, the patient will come with bloating of the abdomen, fullness of the abdomen, because the gastric emptying time is delayed. A patient will have no appetite, the patient will not feel like eating. And if you put a stethoscope on the abdomen and shake the patient, you can hear that sound. It's something like suction splash that you get in the respiratory system examination when you are dealing with hydropneumothorax. So excess quantity of fluid present in the stomach because of the pyloric obstruction, you can literally, if you put the stethoscope there and just vigorously shake the patient, you can hear that fluid sound in your ear. That is one indirect evidence of succussion splash is indirect evidence of pyloric stenosis, gastric outlet obstruction. Yeah. What are the differential diagnosis? Somebody is coming with epigastric pain, is a smoker, he takes non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. All these patients need not be having this ulcer-related diseases. So what are the differential diagnosis? Differential diagnosis is like functional dyspepsia. What is a functional dyspepsia is another chapter, another topic. What is a functional dyspepsia? Functional dyspepsia, patient has similar features of ulcer, but there is no ulcer. Endoscopically, if you do an endoscopy, there is no ulcer. Just some erythema will be there in the stomach mucosa. But this is called as a functional dyspepsia. Most of the patients that we diagnose as acute gastritis are in fact having functional dyspepsia. And GERD is functional dyspepsia is one of the differential diagnoses. GERD is one of the differential diagnoses. Biliary colic, gallstones or acute cholecystitis, acute pancreatitis, or even acute MI. These are the differential diagnoses when you're dealing with upper abdominal pain. It's not just gastritis or acidity. Upper abdomen, the epigastric pain syndrome again is a big topic. Epigastric pain syndrome, a lot of differential diagnoses fall into that. So how do you diagnose these patients? Usually we used to do barium swallow, barium meal, barium series we used to do. But then after the endoscopy came, we are not doing any more of these barium business. So we just put a tube and you'll know the diagnosis. You can't miss in an experienced hand. So endoscopy is a very useful tool to differentiate between ulcer or non-ulcer type, or even if you are having gastric outlet obstruction, you can pick up the ulcer size, number, size, site, everything can be known if you are doing an endoscopy. So one of the old dictums is Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz said, no acid, no acid, no ulcer. No acid, no ulcer. That holds good also. If there is no hyperacidity, there is no ulcer. He used to say, olden books, you see, no acid, no ulcer. That is. So, and treatment for H. pylori infection also is a big controversial area. When to treat, how to treat. Because every patient that is coming to you, you are doing a H. pylori test, that's rapid urease test or a small biopsy. If H. pylori is positive, do we have to treat or you don't have to treat? If ulcer is there, we have to treat. Our ulcer is not there, we need not treat because the other family members will also be having this and this tends to recur. And eradicating the H. pylori infection is extremely difficult. So we have to think twice before starting the triple therapy for this H. pylori related infections. So what are the treatment? In the treatment, you have one is eradication of H. pylori with the triple therapy, that is a clarithromycin, amoxicillin, and proton pump inhibitors, at least for 2 to 3 weeks. Clarithromycin, amoxicillin. This because it's a bacteria. You have to give antibiotics. Then acid neutralizing agents. Of course, you have to give acid neutralizing agents. It's a problem of acid. No acid, no ulcer. So acid neutralizing agents or acid inhibiting drugs. One very important group is antacid. Antacids, they give immediate relief. And number 2 is H2 receptor antagonist like your ranitidine and famotidine, etc. Third and very important, most effective group of drugs is your proton pump inhibitors. The proton pump inhibitors, the omeprazole, rabeprazole, pantoprazole, esomeprazole, all these drugs are used just like water. Again, every patient that is coming to us, we use these proton pump inhibitors. We are overusing these unnecessarily for every patient that is coming to us. So there are definitive indication when you have to give proton pump inhibitor. You just cannot use blindly to all these patients that are coming to you. Out of all these antacid, H2 receptor antagonists and proton pump inhibitors, the PPIs are very most potent drugs for the treatment in the treatment of acid peptic disease. And mucosal protecting agent, that is the third one, is acid neutralizing, and second is mucosal protecting agents. Mucosal protecting, there is a cytoprotection. They protect the damage of the epithelium and mucous membrane. Sucralfate is one very important drug. When you give a sucralfate, either tablet or a syrup, a liquid, it forms a protective layer over the gastric mucosa, and the acid-related injury is prevented. So sucralfate is very good mucosal protective agent. And we also have prostaglandin analogs like misoprostol and bismuth containing liquids. So these are the mucosal protecting agents. So how do you diagnose this? As I said, endoscopy. If endoscopy, you diagnose, it depends on the size, site, what is the plan of the treatment. Is it only medical treatment, or does this patient require any surgical intervention? So surgical intervention, as I told you, we used to do gastrojejunostomy. Gastrojejunostomy will be something like this. Can you show this here? Side. This is your stomach. If I want to say in Arba's language, this is my stomach. This is my stomach. Okay, there's a big ulcer here. The food is coming and damaging the ulcer further. So what we do is we remove this duodenum and we attach here. The food comes like that, and this is bypassed. The food does not come in contact with the ulcer in the duodenum. The food comes directly in, enters the small intestine. This is called gastrojejunostomy. Jejunum is pulled, and they make a hole here, and the anastomosis is done between the stomach and the jejunum. This is called GJ, gastrojejunostomy. That is one. And there are 2, 3, Billroth 1, Billroth 2. There are many types of this surgical procedures. Again, that is number 1. Number 2, we also do vagotomy. We cut the vagus nerve that is coming to the supplying the stomach. If you cut the vagus, the acid production also is reduced. Again, there are a lot of complications, but vagotomy we are not doing anymore. The GJ and vagotomy, we are not doing anymore. Previously, they used to do both GJ and vagotomy. And selective vagotomy, high vagotomy, there are again many types of vagotomies. So that is the surgical treatment for acid peptic disease. These days, we are rarely using these things. Again, if you want to know the exact, is it a simple benign ulcer or a malignancy? Whenever you are doing a endoscopy, you take a bit of the tissue to see whether are we dealing with some kind of malignancy or not. And the complications, as I said, the surgical procedure, beautiful complications are there. Afferent loop syndrome or blind loop syndrome or dumping syndrome. So the dumping syndrome this is a blind loop syndrome. Blind loop means this blind loop, he gets infection and the things. And dumping syndrome is the moment the food comes here, it goes directly into the jejunum, taking very less transit time in the stomach. As the hyperosmolar food goes down into the jejunum, see, it absorbs a lot of water into the lumen because this is a hyperosmolar kind. It absorbs a lot of fluid from the blood into the lumen, causing loose motion, and your plasma volume in the blood is less, so you'll have hypotension. Immediately, if somebody comes, many people say that they're feeling giddy, they're feeling like falling down immediately after they eat. So this is a dumping effect or dumping syndrome, we call it as. The food is dumped directly into the jejunum, causing the hyperosmolar food absorbing more water, thus causing the hypotension because of the hypovolemia. So somebody having giddiness and fall, like syncopal attacks, immediately after food, you can think. This is usual complications of these surgical procedures. The blind loop syndrome and the dumping syndrome. are the complications of these gastric-related surgeries. Interesting area. So before we close, I think we'll talk about another very important syndrome, Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Can someone type what is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome quickly, without Googling? What is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome? Hyper? Oh, very good. Who did that? Yes, very nice. That is the answer. So Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, ZES, short from ZES, ZES. Here, there are ulcers, there are triad is there. They should be ulcers, they should be tumor, gastrin secreting tumor. It can be in the pancreas or it can be the duodenum itself. Zollinger-Ellison syndrome is a triad. One is acids, ulcers, tumors, and you have to have an evidence of hyper secretion of gastrin. The gastrin level should be more. If you have these three, your diagnosis is ZES, Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. There is no medicine. They also present like this: upper abdominal pain, vomitings, acidity, GERD symptoms. So when do you suspect ZES? Zollinger-Ellison syndrome is not very common. It's a very rare. When, as I told you, the duodenal ulcers are common in first part. If 95% of the ulcers occur in first part, if somebody having ulcers in the second, third, fourth part, or they are not responding to conventional medical therapy, you suspect the Zollinger-Ellison syndrome and investigate. And what is the treatment for Zollinger-Ellison? It is only surgical treatment. You have, of course, you give PPIs, but the curative eradicative therapies, your gastrin secreting tumor has to be removed either from the pancreas or from the duodenum. That is the surgical treatment of Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. The patient will have a diarrhea, patient will have pain abdomen, patient will have acidity, epigastric tenderness, and the conventional methods of treatment will not help in this. So if you are coming across any kind of situation like this, you suspect Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. They are benign. They are gastrin secreting tumors. Okay. Lastly, we'll talk about the stress mucosal damage. The gastric mucosa also can get damaged because of the acute stress. Somebody has sepsis, somebody is admitted with some burns, or somebody is admitted with say shock, septic shock, sepsis, septic shock, burns. They get this stress-related mucosal injury. Usually they don't cause ulcer, but they can cause bleeding, stress-induced bleed. So that's why by habit we give the pantoprazole or omeprazole to all patients that are coming to our hospital, which is not a good practice. It's good you have to protect the gastric mucosa, but then every patient doesn't require these PPIs. You should be choosy and you should be selective in deciding, because there's a lot of side effects for these proton pump inhibitors. Suppose somebody has head injury, somebody has a trauma, burns, shock. These people, because of stress, they can have this stress-induced mucosal injury, and sometimes they may have hematemesis, or sometimes coffee colored. When you put a Ryle's tube and aspirate, you may get a coffee brown color aspirate. That is the stress-induced mucosal injury. Here, there is no inflammation. There is no inflammation, there is no ulcer. So therefore, long-term treatment is not necessary. Once the stress is taken off and the patient is discharged from the hospital, you don't need to continue these PPS a long time. That's why we should not call this a stress-induced gastritis. There is no gastritis here. We should not call it as a stress gas. We usually write stress-induced gastritis. No, this is stress-induced mucosal injury, because there is no gastritis. As I already said, if you want to call gastritis, it should be proven by histological methods. So this is a misnomer actually. Stress-induced gastritis is a misnomer. There is no gastritis. Stress-induced mucosal damage or mucosal injury. I think now we will stop here. and take couple of questions from anybody.
How to differentiate clinically that the gastric outlet obstruction is due to pyloric stenosis or the edema due to
Edema?
inflammation?
Clinically, it is difficult. Obstruction is obstruction. Clinically, only endoscopically you can differentiate. So edema usually doesn't produce that much of obstruction. And when you do endoscopy, you will know what is that you are dealing with.
So when do we do RUT, rapid UTI?
Yeah. Usually, whenever you are suspecting a chronic acid peptic disease, if somebody is presenting to you with a recurrent symptom for months and years, and especially in endoscopy, you have a ulcer, gastric or duodenal, and most of the time it's a very simple test. You can just take a small bit of mucosa and do a test. The results are out in within seconds, or not more than 1 or 2 minutes. So it's very simple. Rapid urease test is confirmatory of a H. pylori infection. But again, whether to treat all patients with positive rapid urease test, will be a big question to be discussed.
How to decide whether to give PI along with NSAID in patients with pain and inflammation?
Yeah, usually, yeah, it's a good question. There's always a gray zone here. There's no one sentence answer. Which patient will react badly? So non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are very commonly used drugs. They're painkillers. You have to give them. But who will have complications? Who will have bleeding? Who will have ulcers? We don't know. So some people believe that every time when you are giving NSAIDs or even aspirin, you have to give the proton pump inhibitor. But some people don't believe in that. Right? Why should I give? So it's a little gray zone actually. Better to avoid these NSAIDs as much as possible. Best thing is your paracetamol is a very good painkiller. Your tramadol is a good painkiller, and the combination is excellent. You get Ultracet in the market. There's a combination of paracetamol and tramadol. They are very safe. They are gastric friendly painkillers. But somebody wants to give aspirin and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, you have to keep this complication of gastric mucosal injury in mind.
So chronic gastritis and ulcer, are they two different entities?
Yes, chronic gastritis. I have not touched upon, probably time permits, tomorrow we'll talk about 10 minutes about chronic gastritis. I have not touched that part. It's a very big topic actually. I'm cutting it down for your sake only because you're all undergraduates, most of them. I'm cutting down to minimum required for you. It's a very big, you can have a one-day conference about the acid peptic diseases. So the microscopic mechanisms and all those are fantastic biochemical mechanisms. Okay. If there are no questions, I think we'll stop here. Thank you very much once again for your patient listening, and see you tomorrow. Good night. Take care. Bye-bye.